My name is Ingrid Lundeen. I'm a doctoral lecturer in the Department of Anthropology, and I teach a really, really large class this semester, and my students are on their phones constantly, and they're constantly taking pictures of the screen. And so I've been thinking a lot about this already this semester. So Katie and I were really excited to be talking about this today because there's all these cell phone bans that are going on right now. And I'll talk more about those in a second. But when we were planning all of the lunchtime seminars a couple weeks ago, multiple people at the same time kind of chimed in saying, hey, there was an episode of The Daily today about this. And so if you are a devoted listener of the New York Times podcast, The Daily, you probably also heard this episode. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but this is all very relevant because there's this kind of sudden burst of smartphone or of cell phone bans across the country right now. And so this is, we were hearing a lot about this at the very beginning of the semester when New York public schools were going back into session and Eric Adams blocked this cell phone ban in the city. But there have been other states where there are cell phone bans that are in place. And so this is this screenshot of the Daily episode that I'm referring to. But in the discussion of all of this, there's all these things that have come up. It's impossible to talk about phones without talking about accessibility of your students and your children when they're in school during things like emergency events. And so all of these elements are kind of going hand in hand. And so we wanted to talk about phones today because this is a pretty widespread thing. This is just a map from some Newsweek article about states that have cell phone bans or policies in place to some degree. And so this is actually from the Newsweek article that's shown on this slide. That's exactly where this map is from. But across these different states, it's not just, no cell phones in schools. It might be no cell phones during classes or no cell phones during certain time periods. And so it varies pretty wildly, but the yellow states here are states where there are some degree of cell phone ban. And although this isn't happening at the university level, it's happening in high schools and at lower levels, we are getting those students that have been in these environments where they had these cell phone bans. And so we wanted to just have this conversation today to think a little bit about, how do we regulate phone use in the classroom? Should we even be regulating phone use in the classrooms? And how do we embrace phone use? And so there's the session right after this where you guys can learn about QR codes. And I use QR codes in all of my classes, but just kind of thinking about this, I think, is a worthwhile activity. And also, what should we consider when we're teaching students who might have come from these high school backgrounds where they do have phone bans? So if you guys are not familiar, this is an image of the Yonder pouch, which is this little lockable pouch that some high schools use to regulate student phone use over the course of the day. And I'm sure Katie will share tales of her students who had experiences using those. And then lastly, and I think this is really important, is we're going to think about what our students actually think about all of this, because I have a tendency to assume that my students want to be glued to their phone all the time. And I don't think that's entirely true. So Katie and I have both polled our students and have some data and quotes to share with you guys. And so I'm going to turn it over to her to kind of begin going into what she has gleaned from her classes.
Thank you, Ingrid. So hi, everybody. I'm Katie Winkelstein-Duveneck, and I'm a doctoral lecturer in the English department. And like Ingrid, what got me started about thinking about this was this news piece on the cell phone ban, which happened to be on the first day of classes. And so I'm teaching English 120 this semester. So I'm teaching smaller classes. And so I asked my students on the first day, like, what's up with these cell phone bans? What kind of experiences did you guys have in high school or your previous college? Most of my students are recently in high school, but some are not. And then they had fascinating things to say. So I put together this survey and I have some quotes for you. Sweet. Okay. So this was just a few things that they had to say. Some of them said, I asked them, how did your school handle cell phones in class? And some said like they gave you 3 strikes, or some teachers didn't care, or each teacher had their own policies. And then we have the Yonder pouches. So these were as Ingrid said, these lockable pouches, which you guys, I don't know, maybe familiar with. I wasn't. They have to be opened with a special magnet. But then this was one of my, these are all direct quotes from the anonymous survey that I gave my students, totally anonymous. And they said people were breaking them to get their phones out. So they switched to assigning people numbers and putting them in yellow envelopes. Then they switched to pencil cases because the envelopes kept ripping. Then they took away headphones and tablets and gaming consoles. One person said they took away laptops too, actually, and to prevent fights. And then one student actually said they switched from the yonder pouch, no, from the envelopes to the yonder pouches because the envelopes were all in this van that was parked outside of the school, and somebody broke into the van and stole all the cell phones. And so anyway, just wild stories. Okay, how do I get to the next? Oh, here we go. So then more yonder pouch stories. So one student said my school is a scanning school, so they go through metal detectors, and then they call you out if your pouch isn't locked. The dean is there checking your pouch every day. Another student said if you have your phone out, they give you detention. And then the next day when you scan your ID card, an alarm goes off and says you're not allowed to have your phone and your phone pouch with you. Also, that same thing if you forgot your pouch. And then I just asked them, what did you guys think of how your school handled phones? And people had different things to say. So they were like, it was fair. They didn't take the phones away unless it was distracting or it was extreme or it worked. There was a lot of enforcement was stronger at the beginning or the end of the semester. They said, some said it was understandable, but the students said they didn't appreciate the deans standing in the hallway and looking through the window at the students. And then this one, the students said people were banging open their pouches in the stairway, and there was not a single day that you didn't hear loud bangs and thuds walking through the staircase. And then I asked them, how do you use your phone in class? And it was really interesting. Some people said responding to messages from family, taking a 30-second break to refocus afterwards. And then a lot of people said, when my laptop is out of battery, then I use my phone. Or I don't have a laptop, and so I use it to read things. And we'll talk more about that. And then the student said, like, when tickets for a concert go on sale and you have to buy it or it's going to sell out. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Translation, also looking up definitions of words came up, research, drawing, listening for focus purposing, 504 related meaning and accommodation. And then some people said, I don't use it unless the class is boring. And then to check what time it is, to see if there's important notifications, sometimes to text people back, honestly. And then I asked them, what did you guys think would be a good approach? So some people said that, leave it up to the teachers, or the teachers and students can compromise, integrate them, use them in a positive way. If there's access to a computer, then I wouldn't use it as much. Access to technology. And then this person said, and then I had some people saying this, college students should be responsible enough. And if the student decides to be on their phone, that's on them. And then others said it's distracting to others. So there were different, a wide variety of responses. Leave it up to the teacher, reprimand students, do something that's more engaging. One student actually verbally said, smile more. And then people won't be on their phones as much. So anyway, people had different things to say. Yeah, so this, I'm going to stop sharing and just very briefly, so kind of the patterns were that it was all over the map. People had really different things to say, and there was no one sort of monolithic response. But one thing that came up was that a lot of schools now do have these yonder pouches, and it is very highly secured. So there was a lot of, they may or may not have used the word policing, but some of them did. Some of them said, I felt like I was in jail. But some of them just said, yeah, this was how it was handled. So a lot of schools seem to have decided that technology is the answer, with mixed results, it seems like. And anyway, some schools sort of seem to treat it in an adversarial way, like students versus teachers. But anyway, I thought it was really fascinating to get these experiences and ideas for what works from the students, and to get a background, like Ingrid said, of the climate that they've been in around cell phones before they get to us, so that we know kind of where they're coming from. And it was a great conversation. So I definitely recommend, if anybody's teaching a small class and wants to ask your students for their experiences, they'll probably have some interesting things to say. It was a good conversation. So I'm going to send it back to Ingrid, and she's going to present her results when she surveyed her class.
Yeah, so I was teaching a so I'm teaching a very large class. I have 515 students in this class. And so I got a lot of data, which was exciting. So I asked them, so I polled them using a Mentimeter. I had them pull out their phones in class and then talk to me about how they use their phones in class. And so I asked them, do you use it for note taking was one of the things that I was wondering. And it seems like the majority of them do not use their phones for note taking. And then I asked them if they were encouraged to use phones in their classes, because I was kind of interested to see how widespread using phones in classrooms was. And it seems like a lot of the students had experiences beyond just the class that they were in, my class, taking this, using their phone for in-class surveys or assignments. I asked them if they had ever gotten distracted by a notification in class, and more of them answered that they put it on do not disturb during class than I would have really expected. But a lot of students said that they did get distracted by their notifications in class. So then I asked them a couple short answer questions, which I regretted almost immediately because I had 280 responses, which I then had to read through. But so they kind of were broken into some general patterns. So a lot of students found phones to be distracting for various reasons. A lot of them mentioned if notifications go off on somebody else's phone, or if somebody thinks they've silenced it, but they actually haven't, or if an alarm goes off in the middle of class, which I'm sure we've all experienced before. A lot of them stressed that they felt it was a personal choice, and kind of similar to what Katie was talking about, they're in college, they should be monitoring their own behavior, which is, great, but also it is a distraction to everybody around you if you choose to just be on your phone while your peers are trying to pay attention. A lot of students felt strongly that this was probably the most common answer. They felt it was really important for emergencies. So that might be, some university-wide emergency. It might also be they have a kid in childcare or who is being cared for and they need to be reachable for whatever reason. And then I also had a handful of students who said that they didn't have another device. But I've pulled out some quotes, just like Katie, because I thought some of them were especially interesting. I had quite a few students say something along the lines of, it is very disrespectful towards the professor to be on your phone, which I thought was nice. Some students advocating for going back to paper and pen note-taking. They should be allowed but silenced. I had some students who felt that no phone policies are actually a really good idea. And then these were kind of all, phones should be allowed. So students should be practicing self-discipline. We're adults and should be allowed to use phones in the class if we want. If someone wants to pay attention, they will, which kind of goes back to the, telling Katie to smile or something, like it's kind of this interesting, kind of putting it back on the professor, which I have another quote about in just a couple slides. And then I thought this was really interesting. One student said, picking up my phone to check it stops me from zoning out in class, which is really is interesting. And I think it speaks to the relationship that students have with their phone today, where it's kind of just this tick where they need to touch the phone, check it, and then they can kind of go back to whatever they were doing. And it's not necessarily something that might pull them away forever. That's just one person's opinion. I don't have a laptop, so I need my phone. They're an amazing resource. I had a lot of students say that when they didn't understand a definition of a word, they would look it up immediately so that they could keep up with the lecture as I was going through all of the material. And then talking about phones as backup devices. And then I really like this quote, which is actually, I hate this quote. It says, I like when they're allowed because it means a professor is confident in their teaching and doesn't need to require students to put away their phone to pay attention, which is just, again, just like so turning it back on the faculty member. And then I had somebody else say that the restriction sets a weird tone, and they didn't elaborate further, but I thought that was interesting. And then I also asked them, just because I'm always curious about this, why they take pictures of the screen, because I post my PowerPoints on Blackboard. And so whenever they take a picture, I'm always like, why? And so they said that it acts like a to-do list. Taking pictures of things they find especially interesting in the classes is a habit. Taking pictures of resources not on Blackboard. So if somebody is drawing something out on a board, they'll take a picture of that. Like that makes sense. Students saying that they write particularly slowly. And so pictures allow them to kind of go back to those resources later on and make sure it's written down in the correct place. And then these are just a few other things that I thought were interesting. Something that I hadn't really thought about before is taking photos of the board means that they have it in their pocket all the time. And so you can study in places where you don't have service, like the subway. I can't see the board clearly, so I take a picture and zoom in. I thought that that was an interesting comment that I'd never thought about before. But a lot of them did say something along the lines of, I'll take a picture to remember it, I will write it down somewhere, and then I'll delete it afterwards. And then important information is provided at the end of class, so I have to I have to take a picture because I've already put away my stuff. And so on and so forth. And then I also asked them if they thought phones should be allowed in classrooms, and most of them said yes. And 32% of my students in this class of 500 and something students had a phone ban in high school, which I also thought was interesting because, to be completely honest, this phone bans hadn't really been on my radar until quite recently. And so I really wouldn't have thought about this at all were it not for kind of the recent changes and recent discussion about phone bans. So I'm going to turn it back over to Katie for some recommendations.
Yeah, I just want to add that a lot of my students said that their school started banning phones this year, the year after they graduated. Like that kind of hit after they left. So that was fascinating. And let's see. Yeah, so we have a few little recommendations, mostly just wanted to give you the lay of the land of, what we discovered. But one recommendation was the do not disturb. I thought that was a great point. And I didn't know how to do that actually myself. But it seems like a good idea to tell your students how to do it if they don't know how to do it. And so I did, let's see, I made a little graphic. So if anybody wants to take a picture of this, or if anybody wants a copy of it, and it was interesting for me to learn. So I think I'm just going to present this to my students at the beginning of the year and just say, this is how to do it. When you get into class, turn on do not disturb unless you are expecting some sort of crisis text that you need to be able to respond to. So you swipe down and then you turn it on in the control center, the notification center. So that's that. And then what was the other thing that, the other thing was sometimes students are not using phones because they want to, but because it's their only or best option for class work, like they don't have a laptop. So they do, if you're not aware, the library does offer long-term laptop loans. So it's good to get in early. I don't know how many they have left this semester, but you can tell your students, if you're not already telling your students about that, that's a great resource. And then if you're teaching a small class with readings that are not in a book like I am, I started asking my students at the beginning of the semester, who here prefers to read on paper? And then most people raise their hands. And then who prefers to read on a device? And a few people raise their hands. The majority of people want to read on paper. So then I started getting copies made at the print shop and giving them the copies. And then they bring them to class and they annotate on paper. And it's great. It's totally life-changing. So I definitely recommend, if you want them to have a piece of paper, give them a piece of paper. The print shop is awesome. You just email them at 68print@hunter.cuny.edu and you email them what you want them to print, and they make copies for you, and they're really quick and they're wonderful people. So that's a tip that I just figured out recently. And what else? Oh, and then I guess just having a conversation about attention in class, I think, is great. So Ingrid mentioned this, the idea of, you just kind of, you kind of go to your phone so that you don't kind of space out or something like that. And then you come right back. So at the beginning of the semester, I always like to ask my students, who here can pay attention for an hour and 15 minutes? And like one or two people raise their hand. And I'm like, well, good for you. That's awesome. But for everybody else, including me, our attention goes away so it can come back. And that's normal. And it's good, right? So we don't like the idea kind of, debunking the idea that you're supposed to be paying attention at every second or otherwise you're going to get caught or you're doing something bad. That's not the case. The problem with phones is sometimes they take your attention away and it gets sucked away down a rabbit hole where it doesn't come back. So I think just having that conversation and normalizing like attention wandering is good. I've always had a good experience with that. And then, talking about cell phones in class, I think was also a great experience for me. It's fascinating to hear their experiences, to know where they're coming from, and also and what they're using phones for. And also hearing each other's experiences is also great, because as with everything else, the variety of different policies and experiences across New York City public schools is quite fascinating. And once you're in college, they can have those conversations. It also builds a sense of belonging in the classroom, and it builds those collegial relationships in the classroom community that I think are key for engagement.